All right, so you were talking to me about all sorts of things.
Yep.
Tell me what you wanted to go over today, because like you've got a better plan on today than what I do. Yeah.
Well, I listened to a podcast yesterday. Want to give credit to the guy. His name's, I think it's Anik or Anik. I can't remember exactly how to say it, but he had a podcast with a gentleman that was on there, and he was talking about data and how he uses this software or this thing that he created, 11 years ago, on how to predict buyer behavior.
Okay.
And he says he worked on the Donald Trump campaign and
really?
other political campaigns.
In the 2016 or 2020? 2016.
Yep.
Interesting.
And so he kind of shared what he does to help people win in the elections. He had like over 1,000 wins.
Really?
In politics. So sounds like he knows what he's doing, right?
Well, I mean, I will say politics is where you get some of the most sophisticated advertising, especially presidential politics in America. And so even though you may not like a particular candidate or you may prefer whatever, all of that aside, from an advertising perspective, there's a lot of interesting strategies that can be learned by looking at how they're doing their online ads, because they have massive budgets, they have huge incentives to do a really good job, they have access to some of the most intelligent advertisers and creative advertisers out there. And so it's a good place to learn some great strategies.
What he shared was basically what they would do is figure out, they come up, based on the research data that he had, 10 to 12 different messages that most likely would work based off the data. And then they would test those 10 or 12 to then figure out which one or two resonate the most.
Okay.
And then from those one or two, have 100-something variations of those one or two messages.
So when you say one or two messages, you're not talking specific wording, but you're talking like angles, right?
I believe that's what he meant.
A message angle, and then you just find a bunch of different ways to say that exact same thing.
Correct. That's what it sounded like. That's what it sounded like.
If I were to sum up American politics advertising and the messages they're getting out there, I would put it kind of in that realm, in that there's a handful of messages and they just say that over and over and over again, but in different ways. They say it in debates, they say it on commercials, they say it in interviews, they say it in press conferences. But if you notice, it's almost always the same small set of messages, just said in a different way.
Well, and the interesting part about what he said was applying it to business. He says what you would do is you have to figure out first what platforms your customer's actually on, and then know your customers very deep. And so he used an example of a chair company that was running, I guess, most of their ad spend on Facebook to sell chairs. But then he asked them why, and they said, we don't know, we just started on Facebook. And so he said, all right, and he uploaded their data on who buys chairs and found out that Facebook was number 4 as far as traffic sources of where that buyer was. And number 1 was Pinterest. So he said, if you're putting all your dollars in the number 4 platform versus putting it in the number 1, you're not going to be as efficient. And so he talked about how most businesses do this. They don't actually know exactly where their customer is at and dedicate their budgets to the right message and where they're actually at in the platform. And my question to you was, I've noticed, like in the e-commerce world, Facebook ads works extremely well, right? And I always found that the placements, newsfeed, like the newsfeed is where all the conversions come from. But Facebook always pushes you to do automatic placements. Now, obviously, they want you to spend money everywhere, right? But I always do notice that the cost, like the CPM traffic for for the newsfeed placement, is cheaper when it's under automatic than if you just say, I only want the newsfeed. What are your theories on that? And would you say it's a good or a bad idea to only put it on the newsfeed?
So I think it all kind of really boils down to how efficient you're trying to be with your budget and everything along those lines, and how big your budget is. I don't think they're wrong by saying that putting it as automatic placements is a good move. But I think that information comes from from massive accounts with massive amounts of budget.
Yep.
Because if you do that, you need to reach a much larger audience. If you have a smaller budget, though, you need to be very efficient with that budget. So one of the things I think about, everybody's seen like the typical bell curve, right?
Yep.
Like a graph of that bell curve where you have the slope that comes up really high in the middle and then it goes down kind of at the edges.
Yep.
And you have these, if you look at it in quarters, like so this quarter down here are outliers. This quarter right here is leading up to the main group. This quarter, whatever. When you're running ads, your audience looks a lot like that. You have a product or a service, and there are a group of people, it's a smaller group of people, that this is the exact thing they've been looking for. Yep. It's perfect for them in every way. If you have a smaller budget, you can just market to those people, and you've got a big enough audience that you can make sales and be profitable.
Yep.
Now, as you start getting over into the larger part of the population, you're going into a group of people where it's maybe not an exact fit, but it's a good fit. It's something that's helpful, something that's useful, but it's not perfectly exactly what they need because they have some slightly different circumstances. And that's going to be the largest percentage of the audience. And so if you have a big budget, you can burn through that smaller, perfect audience and perfect group of people much faster. And then you have to start marketing to this larger group of people.
Got it.
And when you do that, having lower CPMs so you can reach a much larger audience can still be extremely profitable.
Yep.
Because you just couldn't spend that amount of money on that small group of people.
Got it.
And so that's how I kind of look at it and think about it. The other thing I look at it too is like what are the incentives of, we talked about this before, what are the incentives of Facebook, right? Like advertisers are Facebook's customers and clients.
And let me also interject what you're saying, because this also goes into YouTube ads and Performance Max.
Yeah.
How I don't know if you knew this, but YouTube forces you to now use it on Google Display.
Oh, okay.
You can no longer uncheck that.
Oh, really?
So I think this applies to Facebook. I think they're all going to this.
Yeah.
Like you have to advertise and
right.
To me, these lower profitable channels.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. This is I look at things I try to look at things in a very holistic way and try to look at why everything's happening, and I also am a nerd when it comes to behavioral economics, which is essentially matching psychology of why people buy to buying and economics and things, and it's nerdy, but that's who I am, right? So you have these companies that are publicly traded, Facebook, Google, they're big companies. Their incentives are to show profit, not only show profit, but show an increase in profit at the end of every quarter.
Yep.
And so even though they dominate these markets, their incentives are to prove to their shareholders that not only are they profitable, they're increasing in profitability.
Yep.
So they have this constant pressure to come up with new ways to increase their margins and improve their bottom line and the ratio of their expenses to their revenue. And so constantly, you see this with Netflix. They're constantly raising their prices.
Yep.
I'm like, you guys dominate everything. You've been profitable for 10 years.
Yep.
Why can't you just chill and be profitable?
Yep.
Maybe even discount everybody.
Yeah.
But no, they keep raising their prices because their incentives are to show to the shareholders that they're continuing to increase in profits. So when you understand that principle, you start understanding why some of these things can happen and why these companies have this pressure to continue to do that. Now, if you have, Facebook has, last I looked, 1.5 billion people that use it every single day.
Yep.
That's just under a quarter of the entire population of the planet every day logs into Facebook.
Yep.
That is market saturation, right? Like that is. So how do you become more profitable if you already have all of the eyeball inventory that you can possibly get, and you already have hundreds of thousands of advertisers spending money with you.
Yep.
How do you become more profitable? You're already profitable, but how do you become more profitable?
Yep.
You have to start coming up with new channels. So you
Yep.
have the display network. You have these new things like Performance Max with
Yep.
YouTube, where you have to, if you're going to run ads on YouTube, you have to also run ads on some of these other
Yep.
channels that
never work.
that don't
basically.
work, but they require you to spend
Yep.
money on those channels.
Yep.
Right? And the same thing is with Facebook. Facebook keeps coming, they have their audience network, which
Yep.
is like Google's display ads. They have in-stream video
Yep.
ads. So they can say, hey, we have this new inventory.
Yep.
But and they might even start shifting over to, forcing people to do that.
Yep.
And so when you take all of that into consideration, this is why they're doing some of those things. And to advertisers, we're thinking, well, that's stupid.
Yep.
That's not helping us make money. They don't care. They don't care. They're trying to increase their profitability. Now, I'm not saying this is a terrible thing and they're evil for doing all
Yeah.
this stuff. I'm just saying understanding the incentives is what helps you understand why some of this is happening. And when you understand why some of this is happening, you can kind of start to predict and see moves and be a leader and a front runner in
Yep.
some of these new strategies as an advertiser, because I can't call up Zuckerberg and say, hey, why are you doing this? This is
Yep.
stupid.
Yep.
This is affecting my
Yeah.
agency.
Yep.
He doesn't care.
Yep.
But you can't really change that direction. But what you can do is be one of the early adopters and early understanders of a lot of these things, and that will make you stand out to the
Yep.
crowd instead of being reactionary to everything.
Yep. And I think, one of the things that I've been using for years is, even though this goes against what they tell you to do, I've been using only the newsfeed placements for
Uh-huh.
like my e-commerce
Yeah.
clients. All the ones that only do that have higher profitability
Mm-hmm.
than the ones where we use automatic placements. I've tested it over and over
Yeah.
and over. Like, I don't know how many tests. Every single
Mm-hmm.
time, only having the newsfeed placements. Although the CPMs are higher, conversions are better.
Yeah.
And your cost per purchase or cost per leads are better.
Yeah.
And so that's something where I just found interesting that he mentioned, because it almost feels like the advertising platforms are trying to go away from optimizations. And this gentleman was talking about optimizing more.
Right.
And I've always thought, well, how do you do that if the advertising platforms are essentially trying to get away from that? Even though, to me, it makes the most sense. If you look at data, no matter what it is, if you want to get the best results, focus on the part that's getting the best results,
Yeah.
and get rid of the rest.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges that I feel moving forward, especially when you're excluding certain placements, is to try to get that control of where it should show.
Yeah.
Because those are always the best, highest converting channels.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Some of my thoughts on that are the CPMs go. It almost feels like maybe they try to penalize you when you do that, but you're still getting the cost per result that you want, so it doesn't matter. But it just seems like the CPM goes higher, no matter what platform you're in.
Yeah.
When you try to isolate the placement.
Yeah. And I think this just goes to show that it's really important to look at your actual numbers.
Yep.
And maybe not trust the numbers the ad platform is reporting to you, not because they're lying to you, but because it's very difficult for an ads platform to be completely accurate. But
Yep.
then you look at your actual numbers. We spent, just your high level numbers. We spent this much in ads. We made this much revenue. We know this revenue came from our email list and not from ads.
Yep.
And we know this part of our revenue maybe came from organic, but this came from ads, and then run those numbers and be like, all right, we're doing good. We should keep doing more. Plus, spending more on ads builds up our email list. Our email list is almost pure profit when we
Yep.
sell off the email list, right? And so just looking at those high-level numbers and then constantly testing. You know that you've probably heard the saying, you know what the definition of insane is? Doing the same thing
Yep.
over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, that's not really true for marketers. Because you're not technically, even if I run the exact same test in 2 months,
Yep.
you know, audience network and all the placement, automatic placements versus feed placements, even if I run the exact same test in 2 months, so many things have changed behind the scenes with Facebook's algorithm and Google's algorithm or whatever, and how they handle ads, that you're not running the same test. And so you need to run those exact same tests to see, are my conclusions still valid? Because there's been all these other things that change that I don't know. They don't publish all of their changes. We don't know. So we need to kind of constantly run that. And that's one of the things I really like about you, Greg, is you're like, well, I'll test it again. And you test it again, and you're like, still the same. But as soon as that changes, you'll know. Whereas all of the other advertisers and marketers and media buyers or whatever, they will get burned. They'll be like, oh, this used to work. What's going on? And
so you have to constantly test and question what's going on at the current state. And that's what I'm constantly doing, is looking at, well, it looks like this is what's going on right now, and making those adjustments. Another thing that I noticed is, when you're running the ads, with attribution. So we're doing this test with shutting off a certain channel with our ads to see how much it's actually impacting it. And the attribution in all of our data shows that it wasn't that impactful. But as soon as we've shut it off, we have seen a massive impact. A big drop in purchases. And so that's another thing, is to try to figure out, like, where are the ad platforms missing the results, like not giving themselves credit. Right? Because this channel is, as soon as we turned it off, we've already seen literally a 70% drop in income. Wow. But that's not what it shows when it's turned on. And so that's like an interesting thing, is it's almost like you have to test turning on and turning off things to figure out what's impacting the bottom line.
Well, I think we're constantly kind of, we'll never get to kind of where this was, but we're constantly kind of moving towards getting creative with how you detect the success of an ad, like you used to have to do with direct mail marketing and with billboard advertising or whatever. It's, you got to put it up and kind of see, and then look at your high level numbers. You don't have the direct feedback. There was that sweet spot for about 10 years where none of the ad platforms cared about privacy. And so marketers could have really accurate data. Well, now there's a lot of privacy concerns with iOS 14, 15, and upcoming 16. Those are going to have a lot of changes. Google has announced their advertiser sandbox, which on Android is going to...
Which is always good news for marketers. More changes.
And that's going to impact some things as well. And so you got to look at those high level numbers, and you got to think differently about things. Like one of the things you were talking about earlier, I want to circle back to was Pinterest. I mean, how many advertisers that listen to this podcast here have even spent $1 on Pinterest?
I know. I have, but not many.
Not many.
And full disclosure, probably maybe maximum $1,000 spent. On Pinterest.
And Pinterest feels. It's been a while since I've run some ads in there, but it feels kind of old school. It's kind of clunky. It's probably improved since I've used it, but that might be kind of a turn off to people. But if your audience is there, Pinterest has a lot of ad inventory. A lot of eyeballs look at Pinterest every day. And the people that are browsing Pinterest have different buying behaviors than the people that are browsing Facebook. Oftentimes, people that are browsing Pinterest are looking to do something. Whereas if you're on Facebook, you're looking to kill some time. Or argue with someone about politics.
Most likely that.
Most likely that. But if you're on Pinterest, you are in... Your typical Pinterest user is in a creative... I'm going to make something. I'm going to create something. I'm looking for ideas. I'm looking for a product concept or whatever. And that's a way different buying mindset and a good buying mindset if you're an advertiser.
Exactly. So I think, so going back to even channels. So here's like the next thought process. What would you do in the case where, let's say most of your customers are on Instagram. Right? But when you advertise only on Instagram, the cost for that placement is much higher. To me, logically, it makes sense to disregard that
Mm-hmm.
because they're already there.
Yeah.
So you just have to like make that work.
Yeah.
Versus saying we'll target audience everywhere, like Instagram audience everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's a question I have because to me, sometimes when I'm working with clients, they will believe that their audience is on one channel, but it's actually on another. And then they almost want to force you
Yeah.
to go where they want, where they wish it were, versus where it's at.
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on isolating channel? For example, if all your customers are on Instagram, would you just advertise on Instagram? Or would you take the Instagram audience and advertise everywhere? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it all just boils down to testing, right? And budget. If I have a smaller budget, I would just advertise just on Instagram and then find ways to make that offer more profitable to cover the cost of the increased cost of that traffic, the increased CPMs of that traffic. And some ways you could do that would be bundling or a special offer or an upsell, or maybe you have a freebie and then you do most of your actual selling via email or text messaging or something like that, something that's a little cheaper but more impactful. If I had a bigger budget, then I would definitely be doing some testing to try to find that Instagram audience, or I would maybe use the Instagram budget and I would lose money on that audience to build retargeting traffic in other places. And then I'd be uploading customer lists and things to other platforms and then try to follow them around in different places, understanding that the cold traffic would probably not necessarily be profitable, but you'd make 5x, 6x, 10x ROAS, return on your ad spend on your retargeting and your email efforts after that initial cold kind of introduction.
So here's my thought. So I'm thinking of a customer right now. Most of their purchases happen on Facebook.
Okay.
Right? Would you, my theory or thought would be to put more budget. They're spending $100 a day.
Okay. Is it a product, like an e-commerce type thing?
E-commerce,
okay.
yep.
Okay.
They're in this situation, they're one of those where they wish or want the audience to be on Instagram.
Do they want it because they feel like they have a better representation of their brand on their Instagram social media, or
I think it's mostly because they feel more comfortable with using it.
With using Instagram. Okay.
And so they believe that their audience is there, but most of their purchases, like 85-90%, happen on Facebook. And so in my mind, if you just like eliminate advertising platforms, and you would say if one channel got you X and another underperformed by like 80%, I would get rid of the underperformer, put all the money into the top performer. Now, one of the challenges that you see with ad platforms is at what point, how far can you go before you can no longer do that?
Because I would say $100 a day, that's still a small budget.
It's a tiny budget.
To some people, they might be thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's a big budget." But in the grand scheme of things, that's a teeny budget. And so, as far as scaling that up, you might blow through that tiny perfect audience pretty quick if you were to go to say $300 a day or $500 a day. So. Yeah, I don't know. And then you have to get a little bit more creative. But if you're scaling up and you're still profitable, then you have additional revenue to put money in other places, right? Like that, and that's how that works. You got to get a little bit more sophisticated as you scale up.
So I think, in that case, when they want to squeeze out as much profit, you would think we'll just keep it on one platform, focus on that, and that's going to give you your highest return on ad spend for that type of a budget. Right. Obviously, when you start spending $500,000 a day or more, you have to expand the where these can go, because, like you said, there's only so many perfect customers in one channel. And so that's something that I'm thinking about, how to best serve the lower spending customer. Right. How to get them the highest return maybe would be just to focus on one channel. and only do that one channel. But it was just interesting what this guy was saying, because what I thought was interesting about the information he was stating is when you're talking about political campaigns and you're talking about one message, he literally said he only focused on one message.
Yeah.
Once he figured that out.
Yeah.
And that is it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's interesting because of the size of the budget.
Yeah.
I thought, well, how do they do that?
Well, I think...
And he was saying Facebook.
Yeah.
So he mentioned they were doing this on Facebook. And they're spending millions and millions of dollars.
I mean, I looked at it. I haven't looked at the 2016 numbers, but I looked at the 2020 numbers. And off the top of my head, Donald Trump on Facebook alone spent about $120 million in ads. And that was just in that that year. Like, that wasn't... I don't even think that was total over a couple of years. I think it was just that year. And Joe Biden spent, I think, just a little bit more, like $5 million more or something like that. So they're spending some serious dollars. I think the one difference you got to understand, though, is they don't care about profitability.
That's true.
They're not trying to make sales.
Yep.
Right? And so they have a stack of cash, and it's going to get spent.
Yep.
And so when this guy's talking about... we're focusing on that one message. It's about saturation of the entire population, and it's not about making sales. So their success metrics are different than a company that's trying to sell a product.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of good principles we can use, but we've got to understand.
They could be a little more wasteful.
They can because it's
not their money.
It's an all or it's donor money. It's not their money, and it's an all or nothing thing, and all of that needs to be spent by voting day.
Got it.
Right? And so, but the singular message does apply in other areas, other businesses. It's just easier for us as humans to make a purchase decision if our message isn't all over the place, if it's very singular. And that's hard to do, and that's why you got to know your customer and everything. But in politics, it's even easier. And if we start diving, back into politics, the easiest message that will have the biggest impact with the least amount of effort as far as coming up with a message in politics is the other side sucks.
Oh, yeah. Common practice that they all use.
I'm great, but that person sucks.
Yep.
I don't need to tell you how great I am because that's common knowledge, but let me tell you all the way that other guy sucks, right? And so I hate that that's what works, but that's what works, and it's very easy. It's much harder in a business to come up with, reasons why someone should buy. If you have a clear competitor that has a little bit of bad PR out there, then that company sucks message can work. And I've seen that on Facebook. I keep seeing this ad, and it says something like, "Cancel ClickFunnels. This is the next." And it's it's really you've probably seen that too. I'm sure that's working because I've seen that same ad for 6 months straight, and I'm sure it's performing for them. And ClickFunnels has, a very polarizing brand reputation, right? And so this person is capitalizing on that, right?
So it's interesting because as we were talking about messaging, all I could think about was, how do you spend $100 million on Facebook and not burn through literally every single person that would be in that, political class?
Yeah.
But it's just...
I think that's the point. I think they want to burn through everybody. They want everybody to see that message. And they don't care if they get ad fatigue at all, because they want every single person that's on Facebook to see that message. And here's the funny thing, though. Even in 2020, I don't think I saw very many Trump or Biden ads.
Yeah,
myself.
Me neither.
Myself. It was weird, but they were blowing a lot of money, which makes me think maybe they're targeting a different age demographic or something like that. Or
the only place here's where I saw they were using Google Discovery ads heavily. That's where I saw a lot of the advertisements.
Yeah.
And when I say a lot, I'm talking a lot.
A lot, huh?
So, but only in a short span. So I didn't see anything. And then like that final month, it was like I could not go anywhere on YouTube without seeing it.
Yeah.
Like it was above every video I was watching on the side, and I was
Yeah.
like, man, I wonder how much they're spending on this campaign because
A lot. A lot.
I can't.
Yeah.
I literally can't
Yeah.
go anywhere without seeing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, here we're having local elections here in Utah, and I've seen quite a few local YouTube ads
Oh, okay.
for a couple of candidates. There's one particular candidate in Utah that there is a clear effort to get that person not reelected.
I actually think I know what ad you're talking about.
And
Is it an in-stream ad? Or like pre-roll, or is it?
It was a pre-roll on
yeah.
YouTube. Is the ones that I've been seeing. I haven't
actually
seen this on Facebook, but I've seen it on YouTube quite a bit. And so that's been pretty interesting. But I think as advertisers get a little bit more sophisticated, and you're going to see just more and more digital ads for local stuff, because it's not as hard. It's more approachable now for someone than it used to be.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think YouTube it's like TV.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they literally have YouTube TV. So when you're trying to mimic maybe TV campaigns, YouTube is a great example. Yeah. This gentleman also brought up. I'm glad that we said that, because he said the new thing that they're actually focusing on is, and I can't remember how he described it, but it's TV advertising, but not like the traditional TV advertising.
Like streaming TV advertising?
I think so, because he was saying right now the tracking and all that with IP addresses is the wild, wild west, and he referred to it as just like Facebook was years ago. And he's like, so that's where we're actually focusing most of our efforts on right now.
Interesting.
Is a place that's not as controlled, basically.
Curious. I'll have to look into that a little bit.
Yeah, it was an interesting, when he brought it up, I was like, wow. You could even see the interviewer was like, really, what's that?
Yeah.
So that'll probably be the next new thing. And then they'll clamp down on that eventually when they figure out that it's being used with too much information. But yeah, I just thought the interview was interesting just because of talking about optimizations and what you can do. And I've always felt like, I wouldn't consider myself ultra data, but maybe I am, because even back when I sold personal training in person, I actually did segmentation without realizing that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
I would figure out, well, my buyers basically look like this, so I'm just not going to talk to anyone unless they look like this. And what it did was it made my efforts very efficient.
Yeah.
And I would exceed my goals every month.
Yeah.
And I with less effort, because I just only focused on
that group of people.
Yeah. And if they didn't match that, I just, not that I would like ignore them, I just didn't put much effort into that group.
Yeah. One quick story from my sales days. I used to sell office equipment.
Okay.
Online. It was like an e-commerce store.
Okay.
But it was early enough that a lot of people still weren't comfortable.
Oh, okay.
Punching in a credit card number on a website. So they would call, and then we'd take their orders over the phone. Yep. Now I'm like, I would never give my number to someone over the phone.
Right? Now it's reversed. I trust the internet more than calling someone.
I know, right? It's funny. But anyway, so I worked at this company for a while, and I was always kind of in the bottom third as far as sales goes. It's not something that comes naturally to me. And then we had this guy come in that I ended up being really good friends with. And he instantly, in his second month, became number one, number two, and he was constantly number one, even above people that had been there for a long time.
Got it.
And so I was friends with him, and I was like, man, why are you doing better? And he kind of couldn't really pinpoint what he was doing different.
Yep.
So just in talking with him, because essentially it was kind of natural to him whatever he was doing different. But what I boiled it down to was, we would get enough calls in the day that you could spend your entire time on the phone, whatever. And I was like, well, that's how you get the sales. He was really, really good at determining very early on in a phone call that this person was not going to make the sale.
Oh, yeah. Pre-qualified them pretty good.
Right. So just based on the phone call, if he knew they weren't going to make the call or weren't going to buy something and they were all over the place, he will work pretty quickly to get them off the phone.
Yep.
And sometimes sometimes his strategy would be, you know what? Let me check on that, and I'll get back to you.
Yep.
And then he just wouldn't get back to them.
Quit wasting my time. I'll talk to you never again.
And I'm not saying that was necessarily the best, but I felt like I had an obligation to help everybody as best as possible. And so he was spending his time filtering people out and then focusing on those that made the good sale. Had the big sale, and then those people that were interested, if they needed a little bit of effort or a follow-up phone call, those were the people he would call. And I would try to follow up with everybody.
Yep.
And he was only following up with the good prospects.
Yep.
And then after I put a little system in place for me that worked for me to identify and filter out those people that would be good prospects versus not, I started getting up to number 2, number 3 constantly. But I was terrible until I did that.
Well, and that's the key, and that's almost, if you bring it back to marketing advertising, it's almost like what you're doing when you're segmenting a customer list or a placement or whatever. You're basically just saying, I'm only going to spend my time where I know I'm going to get the biggest return.
Yep.
And just ignore everything else.
Pretty much.
That's honestly, I'll never forget this, because I was always told in the sales world, have as many appointments as possible. You need to be calling all day. You need to do, all this activity. And when I did it that way, I would generate a lot more sales, but I would also be spending a lot more time.
A lot more time.
And then I remember I literally cut like my work day by like 80, 90%. When I was like, the only people who really buy are people that kind of fit this mold. And so if they don't fit this mold, I'd rather have no appointments if I can't find that person than 10 appointments of unqualified.
Because you're just wasting your time.
I'm just like burning energy versus getting sales.
To feel busy and look busy. I feel that way about meetings a lot of times.
So it's like
meetings.
We don't really need to do that. And I just find that, how can we apply that same thought process to our advertising and our marketing, right? It's like, can we find a channel where basically most of the stuff happens? And what would happen if you just said, I could get more units of sales or more volume if I was on all channels, but I would also be spending more money and energy without getting an exponential return.
Right.
Versus what if you just went to one channel and knew I could get more by expanding channels, but more is not always better. How do I get more efficient?
Yep.
And just focus on that. That's constantly what I'm thinking about is how do we become more efficient?
That's what makes you, stand out, right? Because if you go talk to a typical traditional agency, they're going to say, we're going to list you on all these channels. You'll be in front of millions of people. And they're kind of incentivized to do that because they kind of want the advertising process to be complicated, so you feel like you need the agency. And I think when people come to you, they're like, we're just going to advertise on one place? When you're like, well, if that's working, why would we expand until we blow through it and all of that? But if it continually works and we can scale up with the budget you guys have, why do we need to do something more complicated? We don't. You guys don't want to do that?
I think, and that's always the challenge is, in general, the overall message that I feel like you're told most of the time is to do more without any explanation of why and what the trade-offs are. Right. Like, so if you do more, you can get more, but like the ratio of effort versus return is not like, it's like scaling ads, right? You get your best returns on lower spends, but when you start spending an unbelievable amount of money, that you start to get, what do they say?
It's diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns.
The point of diminishing returns,
I couldn't think of that word for some reason, but basically that's what happens, right? How do you view other ad platforms and more activity? You have to look at it as that could also be a form of diminishing returns because you only have so much time, energy, resources to get the returns you want. You see what I'm saying? Like, so if you want high returns, focus on the area that could get you high returns and stay focused on that.
And if you must have all sorts of other channels, maybe just do some low dollar retargeting.
Yep.
Right? That's kind of a set and forget type of a thing.
Yep.
Right? Even if it's just $5-10 a day, whatever. So you're still showing up. You'll probably be profitable on that traffic.
Yep.
But you don't have to put a ton of effort into it. Yeah, that's fine.
And I feel like that's probably the best use, because every time I analyze accounts and see what works the best, what it really is focus on the
What's
most
working,
profitable things that are doing, and how do we just do more of that and discipline yourself to not do anything else.
Well, you got to understand, and we got to wrap this up because it's getting old, but you got to understand too, Facebook's a big place.
Yep.
So if your most profitable traffic is on Facebook,
Yep.
news feed, you've got hundreds of thousands of people. And most clients, unless they're selling something low dollar, most clients, 1,000 customers is a big deal. And 1,000 people is not very big of an audience on Facebook, right?
Yep.
And so you've got quite a bit. You don't need to expand to all these other channels if you don't want to, right? Facebook, Google, whatever channel it is.
Yep.
But so anyway, let's wrap this up. Greg, how do people get in touch with you?
GregMarshall.co. You could book a free strategy session.
And BlakeBuse.com/SM3 is probably the best place to catch me right now. So
until next time.
Okay, we'll catch you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.